Oliver, there is a great discussion here in Ukraine and even in this area that, offshore, it's not a crime, it's not illegal according to the Ukrainian law, to the Russian law, to anything else. So what would you say? What is a speciality of the offshore? Why it's so bad, as the journalists portray?
Well, you need to realize what offshore is. That I think it's misunderstood because it's more of a philosophical question than it is anything else. Offshore isn't a place, it's an idea. The idea is that if you are very rich, you can pay to live by different rules to the ones that exist in the country where you happen to be situated. So if you're in Ukraine and you don't want to have to reveal your identity as the owner of a company, or you don't want to have to pay high taxes, you can move your assets to the British Virgin Islands or wherever and own them there. And that means that you no longer have to obey the same rules as ordinary people in Ukraine. And you saw exactly the same. Yanukovych, he owned Mezhihiria and Sukholutsia. He owned them via shell companies in London. Yuri Ivanushenko, he owned his companies via shell companies in Cyprus and in London. And as the Panama Papers show us, he has also now got assets in the British Virgin Islands. This is a way of structuring your business to live by the lenient rules that exist in London or the British Virgin Islands, and therefore not to have to obey the less lenient rules in Ukraine or whatever country it is that you happen to rule yourself.
But the people would still make different that, if you haven't stolen those money. Especially for the politician, okay, the Ukrainian president hadn't stolen that money.
It isn't necessarily illegal. It's always important to say that there are legitimate reasons to use offshore. For example, if you have an investor from China and an investor from Russia, and they both want to get together and invest in Ukraine, they might not trust the courts in Russia and China to treat them equally. So they would create a company in Cyprus, for example, where they would pool their assets, and then from that company in Cyprus they would invest in Ukraine. That is totally legitimate and utterly logical. Why wouldn't anyone want to do that? But you have to start asking questions when, instead of just having a company in Cyprus, they have a company in Cyprus that owns a company in London, that owns a company in the British Virgin Islands, which in turn owns a company in Cyprus that owns a company in Ukraine. And the company in the British Virgin Islands isn't owned just by a company in London, it's also owned by a trust in Jersey, and the nominee directors are in Latvia. And the bank account is in Latvia, and that bank account is controlled by a nominee beneficiary in Austria, or whatever. This is the problem, is that these entirely artificial arrangements are created just to frustrate law enforcement.
But what impact it has to the common people all over the world?
Well, essentially, it's not cheap to arrange these structures. If you arrange a structure that involves you employing people in Latvia, Austria, Jersey, the British Virgin Islands, London, and Cyprus, that's obviously not going to be cheap. So if you're prepared to pay that money to do all of that and to employ all the high-ranking lawyers and so on, you must be making a profit from it that is worth more to you than it is to pay all these people. And where is that profit coming from? That profit is almost certainly coming from the fact you're paying lower tax. And if you're paying lower tax, that means the money you could be paying is no longer going to build roads or to build hospitals or to pay teachers or to pay the army. It is instead going into your pocket and into the pocket of lawyers in Cyprus and bankers in Latvia. And this is a problem because, you don't need to walk very far in Ukraine before you see something that you think that could have some money spent on it. If we had more money, then we could repair that hole in the road. Or if there was more money, then children would have the medicines they need, or there wouldn't be the world's fastest growing HIV epidemic. If you have a lot of money, whether you've stolen it or earned it legitimately, it doesn't really matter. You want to keep it somewhere where it will be safe. And there is nowhere safer in the world to keep your money than London and New York. That's where you want your money to be. Or Switzerland, maybe. So all this stuff about the Virgin Islands and Cyprus and Jersey and Guernsey and the Isle of Man and Bermuda and Tuvalu and all the other tax havens, they're not actually somewhere you can put your money because there isn't anything there to spend money on. They're perfectly nice places, most of them, but there's still nothing there. What you need to spend money on is assets, proper assets, and that is what happens in big capital cities. So all of these places are just post boxes. You send a letter or an email to them, and then someone sits there, turns it around and sends it on to someone else.
So where is solution? Is solution in London? And if it's there, so...
Yes. The solution is in London, not just in London, because it's in London, it's in Switzerland, it's in New York, but it's in the big banking centres. And the solution is that Western countries must stop accepting anonymous shell companies. They must say, if you wish to own property in our jurisdiction, you have to say who you are. It is no longer acceptable for Astute Partners Limited to own property in the UK. The owner of Astute Partners Limited must identify himself as Viktor Yanukovych. That's incredibly important, and places are already implementing that. Britain is doing that. Norway's doing that. America is experimenting with it in New York and Miami, or certain counties in New York and Miami. So that's good. That's a start. However, I don't think it goes far enough. I think it would be a very brave and important step if big Western jurisdictions stopped saying to wealthy foreigners, welcome, come in, but started saying before they came in that they had to say where the money came from. So if a Ukrainian oligarch decided to come in and buy a mansion in central London, they had to prove that that money was honest and not, it wouldn't be the job of the Ukrainian police to prove it was dishonest. And that would have a big effect.
I know you talked with the people from the prosecutor office and the others here. So how possible for the investigators and the police in such countries as Ukraine, which in some way are not authoritarian, and they probably have a chance to investigate their oligarchs, even their officials, how successful they could be and what they can do? Because it's a different place. Here, we believe we have a chance to investigate our officials.
The difference in capabilities and resources between an oligarch and the Ukrainian prosecutor's office is so enormous that there is no conceivable way that the Ukrainian prosecutor's office can adequately investigate these people. It would be difficult for the FBI to investigate, really, to the bottom what some of these people are up to, let alone the investigators from the Ukrainian prosecutor's office. Essentially, the system is so rigged against the good guys that it's impossible for them to win. It is a system that is entirely created and has been created deliberately for, certainly since the 1950s, deliberately been created to allow rich people to get away with things that are denied to poor people. And if that is something that as a world we say we want to stop happening, then we need to change the entire system. And it's not enough to say to the Ukrainian prosecutors, there you go out there and find some oligarchs. Because even if they find the bank account in Monaco or wherever where an oligarch kept money, by the time they get there, the money won't be there anymore.
You know, we talked to and how the investigation, which Hromadske had been a part on the Poroshenko using tax havens, BVI, for selling his company, as he's saying, how it's seen from the West in the context of the whole this range of many politicians, leaders who in that or this way had been using this practice.
Well, I mean, I think it looks the same in the West as it looks here. I mean, there isn't necessarily anything illegal about setting up a structure in the British Virgin Islands to sell your chocolate empire. You know, that's fine. It's completely legal. But you do have to ask a very important question, which if an ordinary Ukrainian wants to sell a car or anything, a computer or a flat, they do not do that via a corporate vehicle registered on the British Virgin Islands. They just don't. No one does. It costs money to do that. So why, therefore, is Mr. Poroshenko using that structure to do it? Why can he not just have a company in Ukraine and sell it in Ukraine? And there really are only two answers to that question that I can think of. One of which is because it is more profitable to him to sell it there, which basically means he would pay less tax. And the other one is that he would escape attention from doing it there. Neither of those is a good answer to the question. Now, it's possible there is a third answer which I haven't thought of, but I can't imagine what it could be. So if, as the president of a country, you are taking business decisions to either avoid scrutiny or to avoid taxes, that's bad. And there isn't any other way of spinning that. People have been trying. I wrote an op-ed about it in the New York Times, and I've received a lot of comments pointing out that he wasn't doing it himself, he had people to do it for him. That doesn't make it any better to me. If an ordinary Ukrainian is selling a car, they can't afford to have people to do that for them. It doesn't make it better just because you're not doing it yourself. It's still on your behalf. No, it doesn't look good. And it has severely harmed his image, I think, among people who would like to defend him in the West.
In our case, yeah, that was, let's say, partly Ukrainian investigation, which had been broadcasted on the state TV. We're currently talking on our colleagues from Russia, and we hear the answer to their investigation that, 2 billions? Too little. Yeah. We're speaking about the investigation on the Putins there. So isn't it like really feeling from, maybe it's not the first investigation of this kind, but really you were doing a lot of things on Russia. So is it just a part? How do you feel about this, this discovery?
Well, I mean, it's just another piece in the jigsaw. Everyone, okay, I don't think anyone was under the impression that the people who currently run the Russian Federation were honest people. We already know about the fact that, Vladimir Yakunin, for example, has an enormous palace outside Moscow, or that, the Rottenbergs have done very well for themselves out of the state contracts.
Rottenbergs is also the friends of Putin.
Exactly, and Vladimir Yakunin, also a mate. That frankly, the best career choice anyone could have made in the last years would have been to befriend Putin in the early 1990s. If you made friends with Putin in the early 1990s, you're probably a billionaire by now. It's extraordinary. If you bought a dacha next to his, you have a minimum of like $500 million. It would have been brilliant. That everyone knew, but still the way it was done, that was what was amazing about the Panama Papers. The way it revealed the steps being taken to hide all the money that's sloshing about. It's extraordinary.
And the final, can we estimate an approximate amount of the money which are, the countries in general, the world, the people are losing because the big guys and the rich are using of tax havens? People
have tried. I mean, often a figure used is 10% of the world economy. So $1 in 10 is hiding offshore. Which is probably, but you're kind of plucking figures from the air. If you're looking at trying to compare the assets, the world's assets and the world's liabilities, that's the kind of figure you come up with. But it's no one knows because it's offshore. That's the point of offshore, it means no one knows. Really, for any action to be taken, it requires a concerted effort by essentially all the rich countries in the world to force the owners of companies to reveal themselves and to drive dirty money out of their economies. That would be massively beneficial to Ukraine and other places, obviously. But my worry is that rich countries are only interested in preventing the citizens of rich countries avoiding taxes, that they don't care about stopping citizens of Ukraine or citizens of Tanzania from doing it. That's what I'm concerned about, that essentially all of the arrangements that will be made will be bilateral arrangements between the European Union and America, and Japan and Australia, and Canada will be allowed to join in. But that essentially Russia and Ukraine, we don't care because we just like the money. That's what I'm worried about.